Hello and welcome to the second section of this course, Setup of the Lab Environment and Course Resources. We'll be covering the section overview followed by our first video, Installing Docker. In this section, we'll set up the Ansible lab that we'll use throughout the course. The lab environment uses Docker, so we'll start with the installation of Docker Desktop. We're going to go through the setup process for this on macOS and Windows. For those of you using Linux, we'll also cover the installation on Linux using Ubuntu as a reference Linux OS. After installing Docker, we'll set up our lab environment using Docker Compose, a tool commonly provided alongside the installation of Docker, allowing us to easily run multi-container Docker applications with shared networking. When this is complete, you'll have a dedicated Ansible lab environment. Ansible is an agentless architecture, meaning it doesn't require the installation of an agent on the target for Ansible to communicate with it. It does, however, require connectivity from the Ansible control host to the inventory target with a trusted relationship. When using Linux, this is through the use of SSH, the secure shell. In this video, we go through an overview of what SSH is, and we use it to configure passwordless SSH connectivity between our hosts. By the end of this video, you'll be able to log into any of these systems from our Ansible control host without the use of a password. Finally, the course comes with an extensive repository that we'll use to explore Ansible. In this video, we'll set up the course code repository and validate our Ansible environment. Join me in the first video of this section, Installing Docker. Docker is a container offering that utilizes OS-level virtualization, allowing software to be delivered as a container. Containers are isolated from each other, and within the container, we can bundle the software libraries and configuration files that each container requires. Docker is available on both Mac OS X and Windows in a convenient Docker for Desktop offering. It is also easy to install on Linux. Let's get started with the installation process. We're going to start on Mac OS X, followed by Windows, and then Linux. We start with opening Safari, and here we're going to search for Docker Desktop. And you then click the link there, Docker Desktop for Mac and Windows. We're going to download the stable version for Mac. And once that's downloaded, open this in Finder and open the image file. Drag this then to your Applications folder. And from Applications, we launch Docker. Close these windows down in the background. And choose Open. And here we're going to press OK and enter our password. If you look in the top right-hand corner, you can see the Docker icon. This takes a little moment to start. I've sped up the video here. Once this starts, you've got a tutorial you can follow if you desire. I'm going to skip this. And I want to bring your attention to the Resources section. If you've got a more powerful machine, you can adjust these settings, and the file sharing shows the directories that can be bind mounted into Docker. We then go into the utilities and into terminal. And I'm going to expand this out to full screen. We can execute here a Docker run with -IT for interactive, --rm to clean up after ourselves. We're going to choose Ubuntu as the image, and the command we're going to execute is bash. This is now pulling down the standard Ubuntu image. If you look there, we can actually see that the host name has changed. This is because we're running in the container. To prove this, we'll do a uname-a, and we can also show the etc os-release file. Okay, we'll just exit out of that. This is very good so far. The process for Windows. Firstly, we're going to check the virtualization is enabled. If we go into Task Manager, and there at the bottom, you can see that in my case it says virtualization is enabled. If you happen to be on a computer that doesn't have virtualization, rather than installing Docker for Desktop, install Docker Toolbox. It's an older version, but it does not require the Hyper-V extensions. Open a web browser and search for Docker Desktop. Click the link Docker Desktop for Mac and Windows. And then download the stable version for Windows. Click Run. This is starting. Press OK. This process can take quite a long time, so for the purposes of this video, I've sped this up. Choose Close. And if you try to start Docker now, we've got the message in the bottom corner and it's telling us we need the Windows subsystem for Linux. So click the URL listed and move this window out of the way for now. Download the latest Windows subsystem for Linux kernel and click Run. Continue through this, clicking Next, and press Finish. We can then press Restart here. It's actually referring to a restart of the Windows subsystem for Linux, not the computer. That started. Now we can run Docker for Desktop. As per macOS, we have the tutorial option, and if we skip this and go into Preferences, if you watch the Mac version, it's slightly different under the resources. We don't have the control or the file system access layer. This is all native because of the Windows subsystem. Let's start testing our Docker installation. We go to Start and we run command, and we bring up our window. We're going to run the same command that we did on macOS, and we're going to execute Docker, run -IT for interactive, --rm to clean up afterwards. Ubuntu is the image and bash is the command. It's pulling down the image, and we can tell it's running in a container because of the host name. We're in a Ubuntu container. We're running uname-a here, and we're showing the os-release. We'll exit from that. Lastly, we go through a reference Linux installation using Ubuntu. If you're using Linux, given the many variations and choices, This process may differ, but the main objective is to install both Docker and Docker Compose. First of all, we bring up the terminal and we expand our window. And what we're going to do is download the Get Docker installation script. Use curl to pull this down. And then we run this with sudo. Note on the screen the sudo usermod command. We're going to run this with our user. In this case, my username is diveinto. The next thing we want to do is pull down Docker Compose. Pause the video at this point. And that pulls this down to user local bin. We then add the executable with chmod. And now we're going to run Docker Compose and check that this is working. Okay, great. So we're all set on Linux. To save logging out and logging back in, we're just going to su to our user. So in my case, this is diveinto, and enter the password. And again, we can execute docker run -it for interactive, --rm to clean up, Ubuntu's the image, and bash is the command. It's pulling the Ubuntu image, and this is now running. You can see that there based on the host name. And once again, we can cat etc os-release, and there you can see we're running inside the container. For your corresponding desktop, you should now have Docker installed. You should also have Docker Compose installed. If you install Docker for desktop, you'll automatically have this, and if you follow the steps for Linux, we installed this manually. Join me in the next video where we're going to be installing the Ansible Lab.